And we're recording, good. So here's our first lecture series on the foundations and origins of government. The kind of logic to this lesson is to look back through both your understandings of world and U.S. history to get kind of a foundational understanding of what is government and what is its purpose. What, you know, in some ways what we're looking at is, what have you signed up for? What is it that we're going to be studying, and what foundational concepts do you need? Again, as we read here, part of the purpose is to review key developmental steps from global and early U.S. history. And what we're going to surface as a result is the kind of design of U.S. government, and see that that design is part of an evolutionary process, and almost a deliberate evolutionary process. As you go back through history, you're going to see a current that pulls us in a particular direction and is responsible for the government that we have. As we look at those steps that are instrumental to that, you're going to begin to review through certain vocabulary. And what you need to understand is the test is, the basic entry point for this standardized test that you're going to take is based on vocabulary. You have to have a fluency in certain terminology. And it goes beyond just the identification level. It's the identification and analyze. You saw that in your practice test on civil rights, where you were identifying certain things, and then you were having to talk about what made those things effective or ineffective, right? There's always an identify and apply. So the assumption is, when you start this, I can't start at the Constitution. Ideally, that's where I'd start. I have to backtrack a little bit and make sure that the work that you did in your earlier kind of coursework has gelled. That terminology, concepts, evolutionary steps are all in place so that we are all on the same page when we start, okay? One other way to look at the terminology, again, think of this, I mentioned this in our first kind of series, think of this like an engineering course, where you want to understand, we're looking at a car, we want to understand the carburetor, and we're going to look at how the carburetor is kind of put together, but then what's its larger role with regards to the whole car? How does it make the whole car run? That's kind of a way to look at this course. We're going to continually look at the parts of a machine, and then once we understand those parts, look at how they help the car run, both in theory and in practice, really. There's kind of two levels to that, okay? So, to start, actually, here's a fun little exercise. Flip your notes over. Hopefully you haven't looked yet. Let's see if you know what you've signed up for. We're going to do this at home as well, if you're watching this at home. Give me a definition of government. You signed up to study government in an intensive kind of way. What are we studying? Give me a formal definition of government. I'll give you 2 minutes to write it down. So this is often how our warm-ups will work as well. I'll ask you a question, and you're gonna. It's really about, do I know this question? Sometimes you won't get time enough to get all the way through it, or you won't be able to be as thorough as possible, but it's about raising red flags. So the red flag in this case is, did I know what I signed up for? What am I studying here, right? A formal definition of government is somewhat dry. It's obviously academic in nature, and we've got to breathe some life into this. But if you look at most textbooks, this is how they would define it. You're studying, when you study government, you're studying the people and the institutions. And these are important terms and concepts that have the authority to establish laws and public policy. And what we've got to do is dissect each of those underlying terms to go a little deeper with them. Because when we're talking about the people, often, you know, there's a singular face that may come to mind when you're thinking of government. The president may come to mind, right? But there's an awful lot of individuals that are involved in the daily kind of runnings of our government. We've got to become more familiar with them. You know, government includes more than just one individual. It's not just the president. It's not just Congress. You know, we're going to go deeper, and you're going to see that in a second when I open up this link as we look at the institutions. Because when we talk about institutions, it's more than the three branches of government. Ideally, those come to mind real quickly, right? Our three branches of government, what are they? Judicial, executive, and the legislative. There's got to be more than just that, right? Not you. All right, this is kind of you know, when you look at your lecture notes online, actually I'm going to send them to you as an email attachment. When you look at them, you'll have this, and we're not going to do this exhaustively, but as you kind of open these things up, you're going to see quite a list. You know, these are boards and commissions and committees that I just did something wrong with. This is not 100% calibrated. Go away. My board is not completely calibrated here. So essentially what you want to think about is that these are boards and commissions, special groups that are convened to look at particular issues. And they are convened by any one of the branches. So for example, we're looking at the Appalachian region. You know, an amazing kind of mountainous region that is, if you know anything about Appalachia, they have economic kind of, you know, there's the socioeconomics there are quite difficult. Here's an American Battle Monuments Commission. You know, there's all kind of monuments out there to battles, and this is a group that is, you know, and I can open this and we can look at more specifically what they do. So I'm just going by the title, but to make sure that these monuments are preserved and that they're publicized, I suppose, and they're going to look at you know, bringing new ones into kind of existence. So Arctic Research Commission. So on that this list goes. Indian Arts and Crafts Board. You know, these are important kind of things actually, because that preserves kind of the original people's indigenous kind of culture, right? On and on it goes. So, and again, you can open up this, and there are, you know, hundreds of departments and agencies and people that work there. So now we go to the executive, I think. We go over here to the executive. And we're going to click open executive agencies. All right, so now I've got departments listed. And these are kind of traditional departments that you may recognize. All of these departments, do you know what these make up? The cabinet, very good. This is the president's cabinet. Departments that you know, focus on key issues, and there are people that sit atop of these departments that give the president advice. So at top of the Department of Agriculture is the WHO, not by name but by title. It's a deceiving title. Who's in charge of the cabinets? Secretaries. So you've got, you know, Secretary of Agriculture, Commerce, Defense, Education, so on and so forth. All right, so that doesn't look like too daunting of a list until you click on it and you realize that there are sub-offices and agencies. And anytime there's red, I can make it go bigger. Oh, goes back. All right, so you begin to get the idea. I won't open all of these. Do you get the idea? You know, all right, so here's the Executive Office of the President, the EOP, which is a, believe it or not, this is a mini bureaucracy set up to help the President navigate the larger bureaucracy. The groups that I'm opening are so confusing and sprawling that the President needs a kind of a smaller group that acts like as a liaison. They kind of, you know, all right, let's figure out what the Department of Agriculture is talking about and doing and have them report back to us. And then we'll consolidate that information and give the President just the information he needs. All right, so within the executive branch, there is this EOP. There are independent groups. And again, like the CIA has some autonomy because they're looking at intelligent issues or intelligence issues, security issues. Here's the judicial branch. And I can open up all these courts. Here's the legislative branch. And again, I'm just opening up quasi-official. All right? So just having opened up a handful. That's kind of fun. Do you get the point? When I say people and institutions, it is more than what you see on the surface there of the three branches and the President as the central person. If you were to really do an intensive study of government, if you were going to be someone that works in Washington, D.C., you'd have to have a greater familiarity with all of this. Because all of these, on some level, have a hand in shaping what government does, which is to make laws and public policy. Now, laws are rules, sure, but what distinguishes them from rules is that they're enforced, that there's a governmental authority that you know, will hand out kind of penalties, can be punitive if you don't follow them. They're enforced by a political authority. Now, how does that distinguish from public policy? You know, I was a political science major. I went to George Washington University in Washington, D.C., and I was a political science major. And I just liked the study of government. I didn't know exactly where I was going with it. And there were all these people going into policy. You know, they were, you know, what are you studying? What's the job that is at the end of this kind of rainbow? Well, policy. I'm like, what the heck is policy? It's this kind of term that meant, obviously, everything and nothing, it seemed. Policy is kind of the sum total, the cumulative kind of purpose of all of the laws. I think what made it so nebulous, what made it so kind of strange is it indicates that there is a design, there's an intent behind the laws. And there's not necessarily, because there's a lot of people pulling the levers. There's a lot of people that have their political agenda within all of those governmental institutions that, you know, change the course and direction of government with regards to a particular issue. But overall, you know, if you back up far enough, there often is kind of a cumulative purpose to the laws. And that's what we're really looking at. And I keep saying laws. What you've got to remember is the job of the legislative branch is to do what? Let's make sure we know this. What do they do, Liam? What's the legislative branch do? They make the laws. Plain and simple, right? What's the executive branch do? You hear it in there.
Enforce the laws.
We're going to be careful with that term. That's the right term, but we got to make sure we're using the right version of enforce, because if what we mean by enforce is you didn't follow the law and I'm penalizing you, that's not as complete a picture as we want. That's one end of it. They will enforce. They have agencies that monitor to make sure, like the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. There are rules that you're supposed to follow with regards to emissions. If a company is not, or a state is not following those rules, they'll hand out sanctions, and then that way